Noseman is one of the great authorities on Cinema 4D, and he's got lots to say. As you know, he has an opinion on most things. So
on everything.
On everything. So we're delighted to have him back here. So off you go. He was typing in text as we speak. So over to you, Thanasis.
Oh wait, I'm not done yet. Oh, I even misspelled my name. That's how good I am. It's the PC's fault. So a couple of things of pieces of advice. Number one, you can always blame the software, the PC, or someone else, right? The last person to take blame for anything is yourself. Right, that's advice number one. So I want to start. Sam, where are you going? Come here. So I work for the Maxon training team, and Simon is our leader in the Maxon training team. And the Maxon training team is the coolest group of people in the coolest department of Maxon, which is a very cool company to begin with. All right, and we do training. We do certifications for all the products. We do daily shows. And first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to my colleagues out there in alphabetical order. A Noseman, Chad, Darren, Dr. Sassy, Ellie, Hashi, Ian, Jonas, Louis, Max, Michelle, and Seth. And of course Simon, which is not on this list. Because they have shows, and the shows we have have number one, the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, where you can catch all the recordings, all the shows, and there's an enormous amount of knowledge. And that doesn't include Cineversity, which is our own training platform for all our software products. Now we have the Red Giant YouTube channel. On it, we have VFX and Chill with Seth and Hashi every Friday. We have the Maxon YouTube channel, of course, which hosts the 3D Motion Show. If you have any questions, you send them to training@maxon.net. If you go to maxon.com and you have a truck, you can buy a lift for the truck. So it's maxon.net. And then our shows are every Monday, demystifying post-production. Wide range of topics and great people always. First and third Thursday of the month, Max on Color. That talks about color grading and all that. So second and fourth Thursday of the month. If I make a mistake, don't say anything. Everyone's going to forget it. Yeah. We have the Ask the Trainer series. I appear on that sometimes, so don't miss it. Fridays, VFX and Chill. Every day there's ZBrush Live, because ZBrush is part of the Maxon family. And you can go to the ZBrush YouTube channel, and there's a new Ask ZBrush. So there's an enormous amount of information out there for all our products, and we have the coolest people of the coolest department of the coolest company teaching there, all right? And maybe I need to say a few good words about our team, right? Okay, so, all right, Simon, I don't need you anymore.
Glad I could help.
So today we're going to talk about simulations. And there's a lot of information coming out. My good friend Chris Smith, which is right there, Rocket Lasso, he's done some great tutorials on simulations and huge other stuff. They make plugins, they do training, they do all sorts of stuff. So check out him, Rocket Lasso. And simulations, there's a new simulation technology which we've implemented in Cinema 4D. When I say we, I had nothing to do with it. The developer is somewhere here around. You may catch him and have a few words. And I want to say a few words about the technology. Then I'm going to show you how it works, what its core functionality is, how it's supposed to do the simulations. And we're going to talk about the parameters. I'm not an artist. If you want to see nice things, you watch EJ or Chris do their stuff. If you want to geek out and find out how things work, you can listen to my tutorials. And if I make mistakes, again, it's not my fault. It's the PC or the software. So I will be using the word magic. I'm going to use it wherever I don't understand something. I will say, oh, and just by magic. And because of magic, this happened, all right? So if I use the word magic, it's because I don't know what I'm talking about. So this new simulation core is a point or particle-based dynamic system. So I can close this, and I'm going to tell you a few things about its functionality. So I've got a few files here which I'm going to open. Siggraph, oh, that's not mine. Desktop, Siggraph, and it's Noseman. There you go. And it's this. So let me open these, and let's go to number 1. Okay. So what we're seeing here is a very simple visual representation of what the system uses as the fundamental information to construct the simulation. It's fairly simple, but the more you understand how it works, the more you're able to control the outcome of it. So you will hear about it as a point-based dynamic system or a particle-based dynamic system. The PBD is basically the acronym. Now, imagine if we take every point of a mesh, and this one on the right, and every point has a position. The way it's tied to the rest of the object is by adjacent edges, and within each of the polygons, you have the opposite polygons. So I'm going to use Shift-C to put my doodle tool, so doodle paint. I'm going to grab my doodle paint, and I'm going to use it to draw a few things. So these 2 polygons here, that's how good of an artist I am, are adjacent polygons. Now these 2 here, this one and this one, are adjacent polygons. The core of the system uses adjacent polygons throughout the mesh to define the relationships between the points. And over here I have an interpretation of how that looks. And I've simplified it to only 2 polygons, 6 points, and the edges. So number 1, and the most important aspect of it, is the points themselves. The simulation is going to execute by finding some sort of magic way to calculate for every frame where the point needs to go. In order to determine that, it needs to create some relationships with the points that are surrounding that one point. So this point here has relationships. I didn't want to render, I just want to click here. So this point here has relationships with every one of these points. And these relationships can vary. Let's talk about these relationships. So first of all, in order to create an initial motion, we need a force. If there's no force in the scene, every single point is going to stay where it is. So by default, Cinema 4D in the simulation system, you can find it in the project settings, simulation, we have a gravity. So in order to get things started, a force that points in the negative y equal to the Earth's gravity is pointing downwards, it's going to start pulling all the points together. Now that's not a very interesting simulation. So everything is just going to move downwards. So let's talk about the relationships that are going to create the interesting simulation. Number one, I said, is the forces. The next one is the constraints. The constraints are what's depicted as the green lines and the blue lines. I want to change something in the interface because my brain is wired differently and I need to change my navigation to reverse orbit. Good. So the green ones are what we call the stretch constraints, because when a point moves from its position to a different position, then these green lines, I'm going to make them green, change, I need to make it green, change in length. Therefore, this original green line here has stretched. This is what we call a stretch constraint. And when a point moves, all the constraints it has with all the other points, they all change. Now, we will see later on how these relate to the values we assign to them. So a stretch constraint, which shows us how much an object is stretching, is based on just these green lines, which are the diagonal of each point and the edges that connect them. Now the second type of constraint is the bend constraint, and this is applied across two neighboring polygons, so that this point, if this one moves over here, oh sorry, let me do it in a different way. If this rotates, so if this edge here rotates and the point finds itself here, then the blue constraint, because imagine if you twist this polygon here on this edge here, then all the other green constraints, they're not going to change. So the simulation doesn't register any stretching, but because the blue ones now have changed, and it's the opposite actually, this one is shorter, we know that the two polygons have folded, therefore we have bending. So these two are the main structural constraints of a cloth simulation, where the simulation itself can understand if the cloth is stretching when the green ones are changing size, or if the cloth is bending when the blue ones are changing size. So these are very specific structural components that inform the algorithm of what we want that to do. Now, just for context, I'm just going to add an object and go to simulation, add a cloth. In the cloth tag, in the tag tab, we have the parameters for bendiness and stretchiness. And this is some sort of limit as to how much we can allow those constraints to grow, to expand or contract before affecting the other objects. The way you should think of it is that if you have 2 points that are tied with a rigid, let's say a rope that's very rigid, when you pull one, the other one is going to be pulled equally. But if you have an elastic band and one object is heavy, you pull one and the elastic band stretches while the other object doesn't move. This is the kind of relationship we're trying to establish here with a system like this. And it may sound quite simple, but essentially this is how simple the system, the fundamental core of the system is, and it's extremely effective and much faster than other systems. Many other programs currently very famous for their cloth are using exactly the same system. Now, let me move down here. Okay. So additionally to that, we have the collisions. The collisions is a different aspect of the algorithm that inform a point that it cannot go through another surface. And that just changes the trajectory of the point, but it's a third sort of element to this. Okay, so where are we here? I'm getting quite old, I forget, so allow me to look at my notes. So let's talk about the specific how these parameters affect how an object is simulating. So let me see if is this one it? No, it's number 3. Okay. So what I've done here, I've got this editable mesh cloth object, and I've selected 4 points and I've pinned them. And when I press play, you will see that it sort of drapes down. It's quite rigid now. You see a bit of elasticity. Look at that. And let's go and check out the parameters. Forget about all these. We don't need these. So while it's playing, we're going to see that we have a default bendiness of 10 and stretchiness of 0. Now, you would assume that if I increase the bendiness, something dramatic is going to happen. But it's not happening. And the reason, and this is, if you manage to understand exactly why these things are happening, your simulation setups are going to be 100 times easier. The reason why, although we have a huge amount of bendiness, we're not seeing much interaction from the object, is that because this is a sphere and the way the polygons are tied together, if it's going to move, it's going to be more about the polygons stretching, because gravity is pulling it down. They're not going to bend too much. There's no real bend to be had here. But watch this. If I turn this to 0, and I make this, let's say 20, immediately you see an effect. Now I'm going to increase this, and you're going to see that it's going to get to a certain point, and it's not going to change anymore. Bendiness and stretchiness need to be used in tandem, mostly. Not for all cases, but if you want something to look, if you want this to look like a balloon full of water or something like that, we need to work with both bendiness and stretchiness at the same time. So look what happens when I set them both to 10. Immediately now, this is starting to look like cloth. So consideration number 1 is know how these things relate to the points, those green and blue lines. And number 2, start thinking about setting up the, let's say, the quality of your fabric, of your cloth, by playing around with both values incrementally. Now, there are going to be cases where you only want that little squishiness, so you're going to only increase the bendiness and have no stretchiness. But generally, if we're making cloth, we need to balance these and increase them in tandem until we get to the point we want. Now, talking about control, because of the way the point-based dynamics work, it's not only the bendiness and the stretchiness that define if a cloth is going to be softer or stretchier. There are other parameters. One of them, surprisingly, is the density of the mesh of the cloth. The higher density the cloth has, the more floppy it's going to be, even using the same parameters. And this is something that you can intuitively make it. If you take 2 planks of wood and you put some sort of pivot in the middle, some sort of hinge in the middle, it has just one level of movement. If you take that and you add in the same length 10 little pieces of wood with 10 hinges, that's going to flop down. This is pretty much how the whole thing works with point-based dynamics. So let's take this cloth and let's subdivide it. So I'm going to go to polygon mode. I'm going to press US and subdivide it once. With the same parameters now. So what happened? First of all, we need to select object mode. So now this is even floppier than the previous one. And the more you start increasing the subdivisions, you will see that objects become softer. And this is something you can see video number 2. This is just a very simple sphere that falls, right? And it just flops on the ground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cloth on the subdivision surface, because our cloth works on generated objects as well. It doesn't need to be a mesh object. And I'm going to change the amount of polygons this has, and you will see how it affects how the object is reacting. So I'm going to attempt to make this absolutely sort of rigid. And you can see that although it's a bit rigid-er, it's not as rigid as I would want it, like to bounce. That's because it has too many polygons. If I take this object and say, okay, I'm going to do 1 level less, so it's got 1/4 of the polygons. Look at that. No parameters changed, just the density of the mesh. So when you're doing a dynamic simulation using any point-based dynamic simulation system, you need to consider the density of your mesh as an integral part of how the cloth is going to look. And there's even one more level above that, which we will address today, on how to control the look and feel of your cloth. And you will see that the more I'm subdividing this, let's go to 3. It's going to become even floppier. That's it. Now it's totally flat. So mesh density is very important when you're setting up the type of material you're going to make. So there are various other parameters like friction. In terms of what they do, the bendiness and the stretchiness, they define how much a point can move. The other ones, the bounciness, the friction, the thickness, and the mass, define where it's going. So there should be some sort of divide in these two, but that's the general way to think about it. Several other things like double and single diagonals just relate to that original file. What you see here, the two blue lines, is a double diagonal. If you just put one line, that's a single diagonal. It's a bit faster, but less accurate and so forth. So we'll leave it for now. It's just something. Where's number 2? There it is. It's just one of those little details you can dial in for your simulation. There are other effects like balloon. You can put some internal pressure here. Let me get this down to a reasonable level. You can put some pressure inside that will sort of give it, it will make it expand over 30 frames. So see, it's trying to expand here as it's falling. So you can do things like that. We have plastic deformation, which allows the object to sort of retain the, if you understand the difference between elastic deformations, which are the default ones, and plastic deformations, it's the difference between elastic being that the shape tries to go back to its original shape, whereas plastic means that the impact is going to modify permanently the shape of the object. A car crash is a very plastic deformation. So, but kicking a ball is an elastic deformation because the ball never changes its shape after the initial force that hits it. So again, these are little details. For everything we're talking about, we are planning very soon to introduce series of tutorials that talk about these things in high detail with very good examples. So let's go down my list and see what else do I have here. I have a lot of stuff. Now, an interesting thing we can do with this is we can, first of all, apply these dynamics not only to surfaces, cloth, we can actually apply them to splines as rope. So we can do very interesting, here's my rope. So in here, what I've done, very simple setup, I created a Mo spline that just uses some parameters to spin a spline around, make a helix. I could have used a helix, but I just want to show that I'm really smart, so I use something different. Then I put it under a cloner, make many copies of it, and then I randomize their rotations and their positions. Then I have this disk, which is just a disk primitive that I'm using it as a floor, and I've turned it off. And finally, I've added a collider, a sphere. And in order to make any object a collider, so it interacts but doesn't move itself, you just go right-click and you go simulation and you add a collider, or a hanger, as we call it. So then you press play, and then you have instant spaghettification. The initial delay we get, which is about a second, is because all the point data, all the parameters, all the constraints need to be uploaded to the GPU. And then the calculation is very fast. But that's unnecessary, it's a necessary evil whenever we're doing stuff or any calculation is performed on the GPU. The data needs to be compiled in a certain form and then sent to the GPU. And by the way, our simulation system supports both CPU and GPU. GPU would be good for most cases, but if you have issues with RAM, if you have thousands of points and all that, the CPU has more access to RAM. So this is how simple it is to create some sort of simulation. And the next time you run it, it doesn't have the initial delay. It runs because you didn't change anything. But you can see that it runs on procedural splines, and it runs on cloners, and it runs on the procedural objects and all that good stuff. Now, talking about good stuff, you can make combinations of simulated objects by connecting them in certain ways. So I'd like to show you one of the ways we can connect them. First of all, if we take an object, make it editable, let's go and select a few points here. I'm just going to select 4 points. And when I add the cloth, I can go to the dresser, which is part of the old cloth system, but the whole interface for creating garments and sewing things has been kept in place. And what I can do, I can fix these points, they turn purple, and now I have something hanging from a single point. Now the reason it's not working, you must always be in model mode to see it working. And I can play around with the settings if I want, but number one way of attaching objects, of pinning objects, is to use an editable object, select some points, and just go to the tags dresser tab and click on fix points. So that's number one. Let me undo a few times and go back to my plane. We have some even more interesting ways of attaching simulated objects together. So let's take these 3 objects here. And let's go select them all, right click and say, I want to add cloth. And press play and they're just going to fall. Lovely. Let's go and add a collider because I want them to have something to collide to. So I'm going to take this simple sphere here and right click, call it a collider. There we go. And I'm going to make it invisible just so that we have fewer things to look at. So now you can see they are colliding with that. Now what happens if I want to sort of stitch these planes together without making them editable, without changing the modeling? Well, we have an interesting little tag in the simulation tags drop-down. I can rip this out, and it's called a connector. So go to the object you want and click on the connector. And what the connector is going to do, and actually even better, I'm not going to put it on this, I'm going to put it on this object over here. And in the connector, it says, how far away am I looking for other cloth objects? And when I start increasing this, I'm going to set this to create and update live, and you're going to see as I'm increasing it, you're going to see some yellow lines appearing. That means that within 14.6 centimeters, some of the points of this object found the points of another simulated object. And if I increase this, because I think this distance here is a bit larger, I'm going to increase this. Oh, there you go. So, funny enough, there you go. Funny enough, now these 3 objects are actually sewn together, although they may have different cloth parameters. So I'm going to make this a bit stiffer. I'm going to make this a bit softer. And now if I press play, you will see that we have 3 pieces of cloth. This is softer, this is stiffer. I can make this even more, 100 and 100. And you will see that it's going to be nice and floppy and soft. But they're still tied together. So the second way we can tie things together is by using the connector tag, which attaches cloth objects with each other, not with colliders. And we can even use ropes and dynamics in order to attach objects to a spline. So let me go and draw a spline here. I'm just going to go and click once here and once here. Press escape to accept it. It's over there. And I'm going to right click, and instead of a cloth, I'm going to add a rope, which is here as well, but who cares? So now let's go to object mode, and let's go to our connector and update. So let's update this. Make sure my spline has enough subdivisions, because the simulation system doesn't use the Bezier points. It doesn't use this and this point. It uses the subdivided points, the lines that are generated by the intermediate points. So you need to, let's increase this, and let's go here and let's create. And now we're attached to the rope as well. So the rope is falling with everything else over there. You can see it's attached. Now, talking about being attached, I can still use the older tags we have, for example, the rope belt on the spline to create a clothes hanger. So in order to do that, I'm going to create 2 nulls. So here's null number 1. I selected the wrong thing. I'm going to activate my snapping, and I'm going to go Shift S, there we go. 1 null here. Let's make a copy of that and put it here. I'm going to call this left, and I'm going to call this right. And just because I want to see them, I'm going to go to both nulls and set the visibility to be a sphere so I can see them pretty nice. So I'm going to go to the spline and create a rope belt. Belting is the third way we can use to attach objects. The rope belt allows us to use something attached to a point of the spline. So the spline's left point, I'm just selecting it, turning off my my snapping. So this point, I want it to attach to the left, and it's going to turn yellow. The right point, I want it to be attached. I'm going to make a copy of this to the right point. And now you will see that this is going to hold on to those points. And if I get rid of my sphere and increase the length of my animation, we can actually make a clothes hanger with a complex cloth hanging from it. The last type of belt we're going to see, and I have no idea what it is. Okay, we have plenty of time. We can actually belt cloth itself besides being able to belt splines. The only downside to this is that we can do it when it's a mesh object. So if I convert my plane to a mesh object and go and select a bunch of points here, so I'm going to go to my live selection, select a few points here. At the same time, I'm going to get any other object. I'm going to put it in close proximity to this. Just going to go and make it a bit smaller. Good. And let's go and increase the X subdivisions. I'm just going to do this. So what I'm going to do is go to this editable plane, go to my points mode, so I have my points selected, add a cloth belt to it, and say I want to belt the selected points to this cube. Oh, it needs to be an editable object, so I apologize. So let's set this, and there you go, you have these lines. So now we're going to have belting of a mesh object on other meshed objects. So you can see now that we can have this very complex relationship by constraining cloth to cloth or rope. We can constrain things to objects. We can tie things together. We can put them on ropes and so forth. And this is one of the ways you can use to control your simulation. So that's all I have to say about connecting stuff. What I'm going to do now is give you, I think EJ did it. He gave us a quick overview of what's going on in the simulation parameters. The only thing I'm going to repeat is that, actually he didn't say that, the relationship between the substeps and the rigidity. That is something that you have to know and you have to use to your advantage. So what we have here is an object with a defined, let's say, softness and bendiness and all that nice stuff. Let's go and increase both to 30 so it becomes even more drapey. There you go. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say I like this, but I want to increase the accuracy of the simulation. And that happens predominantly through the substeps. The problem is that the more we increase the substeps, essentially we're increasing the rigidity of the object. So if I set this to 80, you will see that the object, well, in this particular case, it looks pretty much the same. So I'm going to go to my bouncing ball here and see what happens when I increase this to, let's say, 80 and 2 of these. Look at that. So it seems counterintuitive that increasing the accuracy will increase rigidity, but we have to remember that the way these kind of algorithms are able to solve the otherwise very complex problem with simulations is that it needs to work on some very specific constraints. And the more subdivisions, let's say the substeps, is it just subdivides a single frame into more into more segments. Therefore, your simulation is more accurate. So there's an aspect of simulations which is called error accumulation. And that means that the lower your substeps, the more the result you see is a result of the points being in the wrong position rather than being where they need to be. And by increasing this, you're actually telling them to be more refined and move to the correct positions, and gives you a simulation that looks so much different. The good thing is that because substeps and subdivisions have the reverse effect, what you could do, one of the things you could do, the mechanisms, is once you find, and I'm going to try it right here and see exactly what happens. I'm going to set these to 0. I'm going to go and put everything at their default. And I'm going to say, first of all, I want to get a specific look and feel for my object. And let's assume that this particular bounciness and softiness is what I'm looking for. Excellent. Now, for whatever reason, I want a higher accuracy. So I say, okay, I'm going to put 80 of these here and see what happens. If the characteristics, now it's become more rigid. So I want it to be a bit softer. Well, if you increase the subdivision of the mesh, it's going to become a bit floppier. So maybe not 2 by 1. There you go. So one of the, I would say, workflows, mechanisms, or ways to think about it is the more you're increasing your substeps to get more accuracy in simulation, if you increase the subdivisions, then they counteract each other, and you stay within that margin of the look and feel of the cloth you want. Because the biggest thing is art direction. I want to be able to make a cloth look like leather, it's stiffer, or like silk, it's very soft, or more elastic, like lycra, that bends. And imagine if you spend a few hours refining that, and then getting some penetrations with colliders, and say, okay, I'm going to up the substeps, and suddenly it totally changes. Your silk becomes leather becomes wood, or whatever, cardboard. So this is one of the mechanisms by which you will counteract this. But overall, you have to remember, it's not I'm good now, let's increase the settings and let's let it simulate. There's always a balance. You're going to have to play with values up and down in order to get the best result you want. Okay, so yeah. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start working on a particular project. Oh, there's one thing I want to show you. I'm going to revert this to saved, because this is a usual gotcha. And this is the reason I made this. Now, when I press play here, this is going to bounce nicely, no problem. Now, there are cases where you want to take your simulation object and you want to put it under a subdivision surface to subdivide it. The subdivision surface object, like all green objects here, they are generators. And there's one setting, I'm just pointing it out because it's hidden in the project settings. Simulate before generators. Whenever you are taking a simulated object and you're putting it under a generator, if that's your workflow, the preferred switch is simulate before generators. Otherwise, your simulation is going to have a 1 frame lag. So remember that if you're making something, you're putting something under a subdivision surface, and suddenly it seems to lag, you're losing the collisions, just make sure that you do this. Now, of course, you can put this up here, but now you're simulating a more low-resolution object. Don't forget, this is a different simulation outcome than this. One flops, one bounces a bit. Okay? So always remember that. It's that one thing that people don't really pay attention to. There are some gotchas with that. I'm going to get to those in a tutorial and all that, or even maybe I have one more presentation, continuation of this one on Thursday, the last presentation. So for the last maybe 5 minutes, I'm going to start a project and we're going to continue it on Thursday, so that I force you to come and sit here or watch on the internet. Okay. So let's go and open my zombie. I have a nice little zombie here, which was made by my very good friend Sebastian Pfeiffer. You'll find him as Everfresh Design. He made the cartoon rig for our asset browser. So this is the final result you'll see here. So the zombie is walking, and he's got this nice little sweater on him. That's, you know, different stiffness here, different stiffness. Different is a very difficult word to say. So we're going to recreate this, given the original, which is just an alembic that was saved. I just did a looping animation. So let's start this, and we're going to finish it on Thursday. So first of all, I want a mesh that complies with my zombie's body. I just want to make him a shirt, long sleeve, maybe turtleneck, it's fashion. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the subdivision surface, I'm going to right click and say current state to object. So now I have a full mesh. I can turn this off. I can make it invisible. I have the mesh version of the zombie without any animation or anything like that. Now, a lot of these things we have here, the tags, they're quite redundant. And I'm going to keep, I don't even need the UVs or anything like that. I'm going to remove, I can remove them all, but I'm going to leave the Fong tag. So this is the product of making that current state to object. Now I'm going to go to my polygon mode. I'm going to use loop selection, and I'm going to select the body, and I'm going to select this loop here, going to go up here and select this loop here. So, and the waist. There we go. Now that I have these borders, I can go to my selection tools and get my fill selection, and just press shift, select these, and I've selected everything bounded by those loops. And the only thing I need to do now is invert my selection and delete everything. So I have my nice little shirt. Now let's bring everything back into visibility. We're not done quite yet, because what I want to do now is I want to expand this, because if we have a cloth and the collider on top of each other, we are registering a collision upon the simulation start, and that can cause the points to go inside, outside, everywhere. Plus, it's not good to glue your clothes on you, right? You need to have some breathing air, right, to have things comfortable. Now, there is a way we can do this very simply. I can right click and say normal transform and go normal move. This is going to move every polygon in its normal direction, where it's facing. So if I click and drag anywhere, you can see everything is distancing itself from where it was. Look at that. Okay, so I've created this initial distance. I'm happy with that. I may need to go now and do some minor optimizations. For example, these points are too close. We have some overlapping maybe here, but there's a very easy way to do that. We can use, from the mesh tool, our brushes. These are our sculpt brushes, but the magicians at Maxon made them work with proper polygon objects. So I'm going to smooth out the parts where I feel that these are a bit too close to each other, and just by smoothing them out, they sort of pull away from each other. I think we have one more issue here. There we go. Nice. Now, if for any reason I want to grab them and pull them out, maybe I want to move these, I can even go and select these individual polygons and say, okay, I'm going to get these and just move them in their normal direction. So go normal transform, normal move, click and drag, good. Then I'm going to get my smooth and say I'm going to smooth them out, good. I'm going to not spend too much time. I don't have any more overlaps. Great. So let's make a simulated object out of this. Now you can see that on the body, on the subdivision surface body, I've already attached my collider tag. Just right click and add a collider. So if I go to my shirt and right-click and say simulation tags cloth. This should work, right? Who thinks it's going to work? Raise your hands. No one thinks it's going to work. That's terrible mentality. Come on. Of course it's going to work. I was right, you were wrong. Okay, so immediately this works with the default values. Now let's go and see some of the problems here. And that's going to be the part where I'm going to end today's presentation, because the fun stuff starts on Thursday. So here's one of the little issues. Right at this point here, when I press play one frame ahead, because there's an initial first frame movement of the arm, and the simulation executes at frame 1, that's the first frame. Unfortunately, the movement of the arm is larger than the gap we put over here. The solution could be for me to take these polygons, just move them, give it some breathing air, so that the arm first moves, doesn't penetrate, and then the cloth at frame 1 starts simulating and touches upon the collision and moves freely. But there's a trick, and you are the first people to hear about this trick. The developer heard about it yesterday. That's how smart I am. Is it cool to talk about yourself like that? I don't care. I don't care. So the way to alleviate this is to offset the alembic. This will happen. You can avoid it if, when you're doing your own animation, you have a frame, the first frame is just a still frame. That means that frame 1, the cloth relaxes, and then at frame 2, the motion starts. Whereas if you start the motion directly from 0 to frame 1, where there is internally Cinema 4D for motion blur purposes, it's calculating from frame 0, but simulations start from frame 1. So if you offset your alembic in this particular case by 1 frame, you see this weird thing happening. But the funny thing is that at frame 1, everything is in the right position. We just offsetted the whole alembic animation 1 frame. The simulation starts at 1 frame, and although here it's in the previous frame, when it goes to frame 1, it's exactly where it needs to be for both of them to be aligned. Now again, if I was to do this, because I do things the lazy way, the fast way, I would just, before I saved the alembic file, because I just right-clicked, I didn't want to mess with it, you can go to your joint animation, and you can make sure that you have a buffer, a pre-roll of 1 frame where your animation doesn't start. And even when you render this, you can just not render that 1 frame. But you need at least 1 frame pre-roll. But because I'm lazy, I spent 3 hours trying to find this way, so I don't spend 5 minutes doing it properly. That is a very nice way of doing things. So now you will see we have no penetration, and everything works fine. So, and you can see the only jolt happens when the animation goes from 90 to 1. And the good thing is, because I have my alembic looping, I can extend this to any number. Did I press something weird? And this will actually keep the zombie is just going to keep walking and walking and walking, and the cloth is going to go with it. And you can play around with this and change the settings, make it a bit floppier. And the stuff we're going to do on Thursday is we're going to create a vertex map that's going to make the cuffs and the waist tighter, because it's more fashionable, at least where I come from, the 1980s, where it's nice to have, you know, tight waist and other things, you know, baggier, like baggy pants and all that kind of stuff. Simon is standing there, you know, you see he's encroaching. There you go. That's the sign that I need to get over with this. I've got 2 minutes, Simon.
We have questions.
You have questions?
Yes, we have
You told me not to answer any questions. Anyway, if you want to see how we're going to create the vertex maps to tighten up his cuffs, how to do all these nice effects, please join us on Thursday. I've got the last presentation. So watch it. If you lose your plane, come on. That's not a big deal. Watch my presentation and or catch it online or whatever. So thank you very much for coming. And if you have any questions, you'll catch me over the next few days. I'll be around. So, question time.
Question time. I've shuffle over a bit because
I'm
we've
doing
been
this.
on the camera thing.
Oh, you want to be... Oh,
So we've had the... Oh yeah, you can be this side. Look,
Oh,
stay
come
there,
on.
stay there.
It fits us
always
both.
like this with you. Come on. So
the camera can't see me. Is that camera?
we had one important observation, and it was not really a question, but somebody was saying that you are the Bob Ross of 3D.
And there's Sir Ben Kingsley of 3D and
yes,
many other people
yes,
of 3D.
of course. But we do have a UDIM question.
Yes, please.
About can you explain how cinema handles UDIMs again?
That's a UV question. Udims.
Yes. Yeah.
You want to hear Udims?
Yes. That was the question. Vitas was asking.
Yeah. I talked about this. It's UVs. It's not simulation related. Do we reply to that?
Yes, but it's just since we asked it extra. It's
Okay.
just like asking you to just reconfirm.
Right. Udims. It's about UVs, and it's a way to handle the combination of UVs and textures. I need to show this. Excuse me, sir. You got your phone in the way. So, anyone that wants to hear things about UVs, make this editable. Go to the UV edit, and let's go and do a box projection. Okay. As we all know, if I take a material, I'm going to take materials are here. I'm going to drag this over here, and let me go and do a whatever projection. Now, when I change the projection of the material, let's set this. Let's set tile 1 on 1. I'm going to go and offset it by 100%. Watch what's going to happen. Boop. It goes there. We all think that a UV tile is constrained to this little 0 to 1 box, but it's not. So there are, I think, an infinite amount of adjacent tiles, both horizontally and vertically. I'm going to put this at 200, so it's down, it's up there now. So for every texture you load inside that occupies only this space over here, this will only project on the polygons which are within this range if tile is off. If tile is on, it will project on every little square. Why am I saying this? Because Udim technology is predominantly a naming convention by which you can put different UV polygons on different parts, on different tiles, and a different image based on its name. So let's say we're creating asphalt, and you need different textures on that asphalt. Asphalt, I think U0, V0, there's a naming convention, you can find it on the internet, will put that texture on the main tile, on the polygons that the UV polygons that reside on the main tile. The images that are called, let's say, U1, V0 are going to be put on all the UV polygons. The texture that has the naming convention that refers to this tile are going to be applied to this polygon, or any polygon that lies within. Imagine another square adjacent to here. So you can do that in Cinema 4D, it's just not automatic. Now, we have a way of doing things a bit better, of course. We don't need to use in Cinema 4D Udims, but the industry does need it. Rick, are you listening? So, and the way we do it is using polygon selections to apply materials. So a big part of the Udim workflow is because most software, just let me go and put this back all here. In Cinema 4D, you can select a polygon, you can create a material, let's say a red material, and you can say, I want this red material to be applied on this polygon. Why is everything transparent here? Does someone have Redshift on? No. My materials are transparent here. Oh yeah, because I've been changing the color. I have no idea what I've been doing. Yeah, and why these are not rendering here. Let me go to my standard interface. And let's apply this to polygon selection 1. This is the other material. I'm going to make this green. There you go. And put this on top. There you go. So we can apply materials on different polygons, but just by using selections. Because most software cannot do that, what they do is they take the UV polygon of that 3D polygon and they move it one tile down. So you would go here and you would transform this by 1. And by using a naming sequence, and your software needs to understand and do these conversions, it applies to that particular material an offset of 1, 2, 3 in the U and 1, 2, 3 so forth in the Y. And that's how we can handle Udims. We don't have a mechanism. Hopefully, Rick, Udims. Yeah. If anyone wants Udims, that gentleman with the glasses, that's the person you need to talk to. But yeah, Vitas, call me. Twitter, NosemanGR, at NosemanGR. You know, DM. Next question.
No, we have to wrap up because we're about to jump over to our next presentation.
Have I eaten into someone else's time? That's a terrible thing to do, Simon. Vitas, that's a terrible thing to do.
Thank you so much again. Please, can we thank Thanasis again for sharing all his wisdom and knowledge. Thank you.
And yeah, grab me wherever you see me, ask me questions.
Absolutely.